Welcome back to another YouTube video, and today we're going to be discussing some low interference options to be able to improve your bench depth. So this video is timely because in the US right now in particular, we're having a lot of people who are going to be shifting over from the USAPL or other federations to Powerlifting America, where they're going to have to adjust for the bench depth rule. And that's something I'm going through myself with some lifters. And I've been having a number of coaches reach out to me just to kind of discuss what would possibly be the least interfering way that we can be able to adjust technique to be able to hit bench depth. Because what we've seen a lot of and kind of been popularized is the sink technique. And I think that is a fantastic way to be able to hit bench depth. But with that said, it is a very high interference way of being able to adjust your technique. There's a big change in how you're going to have to go about technique. There's likely even a change possibly with programming. And in my opinion, the sink technique is likely going to have to be the go-to option for the really, really high arch, extreme range of motion benchers like Meg Scanlon, Sean Noriega, Eddie Berglund, people who, with just a slight adjustment, are still not going to hit depth. They're going to have to do a more aggressive sink style bench to get to that point. But most people are not Sean, Meg, and Eddie. Most people are more so borderline. They're just about there, but they need to be a bit more convincing. And so that's why I wanted to put out this video of the main low interference options that I'm gonna go to for those people who are borderline that just need a little bit more to be convincing to make sure that they're getting 3 white lights. The one thing about bench depth though, and we're not gonna cover this in the video, is the fact that it's a bit of a subjective and odd rule. We've obviously seen how it's been somewhat disproportionately applied to lower weight class females, and they've just been inconsistent in general. So Sean Noriega actually did a video on Powerlifting Now covering this entirely, going through all the different options you can be able to do to be able to not only 1, adjust your technique, but 2, adjust the perception, which is kind of hard to discuss unless you've watched that video, but be able to do things that give the perception of more bench depth, especially in regards to how that might be disproportionately affecting like lower weight class women, why that is, and what you can be able to do to overcome that. So I definitely recommend checking out that video because that's going to be a lot more all-encompassing. It's going to give all the background information you need to know of kind of what is going on with bench depth and why we're seeing this disproportionate application and what you can be able to do to adjust for that. But this video, we're going to talk about these simple, low-hanging fruit fixes that we can be able to apply that can make an immediate impact in the short term for, like I said, the people who are borderline. And the person I'm going to be using as an example throughout this video is my lifter Abigail, who's going to be switching over. And I'm going to be putting some videos up on the screen right now so you can be able to see a little bit of before and after. You can see from the rear view with the bench depth. You can see from the side view. I'm going to be showing these throughout the video because she's the case study right now. And she's kind of what we're going through with all of these options to improve her depth. And I'm also going to use Abigail as the example because I have no arch and I very easily hit bench depth. So me showing the things I'm going to talk about isn't going to look very good. I'm not going to be able to show them to the extent I want. You're probably not going to be able to see it on the screen. So that's why we're going to use Abigail's videos as the example because it's going to be a bit more noticeable of the actual impact that's being made. So what are these 3 low-hanging fruit, low interference options that you can make to immediately improve your bench depth in the short term? Those are your foot position, wearing a belt if you do not already, and then elbow flare. So starting with foot position, we have the option to either put our feet further forward or more under us. And I actually have a video coming out later this year on Powerlifting Now that's going to really break down and dissect the entirety of this. But what you need to know for this video is, on average, this isn't for everyone, but on average, the shorter your torso is, the higher relative up your back you get your arch from. And for those shorter torso lifters, on average, they are going to maximize their arch with a further foot out position. Now, you don't have to be as extreme as maybe Sean, but go look at Sean. Incredibly long legs, incredibly short torso, gets his arch from fairly high up on his back relative to some others, and that's why he benefits so much from having his feet further out. So again, there's always going to be a spectrum here. He's an extreme. The opposite is someone who's longer torso, and then therefore likely gets their arch from lower on their back relatively, is going to benefit from a bit more of their feet tucked under. And that's how they're going to maximize their arch if we're looking to be able to lessen the range of motion and have the biggest arch possible. So as you might be able to guess, if we might bias one way or the other to maximize our arch and shorten our range of motion, we just got to do the exact opposite to, in a sense, lower our arch and then decrease our rib cage angle to then increase range of motion to improve depth. So again, I'm going to talk on the very ends of the spectrum, but if you're very short torso, you get your arch from relatively higher up your back and you have a more forward foot position, bringing your feet back slightly can be able to help to reduce that arch. And the big thing here is slightly. We don't want to make some drastic change, because you'd be shocked how much just like a slight couple inches is going to actually adjust that rib cage angle. You're actually, in a sense, oftentimes still going to get the same arch in your back. It's just that you're going to be changing the angle of your rib cage, and that's going to then increase your range of motion. And then the opposite is longer torso and having your feet more tucked under, which was Abigail. Again, I'm going to put those on the screen so you can be able to see the difference of where we were versus where we are now. She very much had more of a foot tucked under position, and then we moved it out to basically be more just vertical shin position. And for her, that's going to lower her arch, because again, she's longer torso. Where she gets her arch from on her back is lower in relation comparative to someone like Sean. And so for her, by moving her feet slightly further out, that's going to change her rib cage angle and increase her range of motion and then help to improve depth. The next low interference option is to wear a belt if you're not already, which there's a good chance if you're struggling with bench depth, you don't wear a belt, because oftentimes people who have more extreme arches or more shortened range of motion can do so because they don't wear a belt, because the belt can be restricting. I'm actually going to link a video below, because Sean Noriega actually has a video on his YouTube channel from 3, 4, 5 years ago where he actually kind of breaks this down. And if you have seen Sean bench, he doesn't wear a belt until more recently because of the sink style bench press, and he actually covers that, I believe, in his Powerlifting Now video of why you might want to wear a belt if you're sinking. But either way, the more extreme arches tend to get restricted by wearing a belt for a couple reasons. And the first reason the belt is going to adjust range of motion is because the belt's pretty thick. If you have that on your low back right where you're about to arch, it's going to make it a bit harder to extend to the same degree, especially if you have a lot of extension in that arch. And then the second reason, especially if you wear the belt maybe a little bit tighter, you can adjust this based on your needs, but the belt is trying through that external cueing to cause you to flex your abs. And what is the opposite of arching is flexing your abs and going into flexion. And so just naturally having that belt there tenses up your abs, and that's going to somewhat flatten you out. And so again, I'm going to put Abigail on the screen, and you can see the belt in particular makes a pretty significant difference for her, because you can see in her arch, there's very little room in between kind of where her arch is and where her lower back to her mid back is, versus once you get that belt on, she's having to flatten out a good deal because she can't pinch in that spot, because that belt has a certain thickness and a certain width, and it's going to naturally force you to limit your arch and bias a little bit more flexion. And then the last low interference option that I'm going to cover here is elbow flare. And so this is something that I think is decently well known at this point, because I think we were all surprised when the bench depth rule came out that we all thought, okay, we're just going to have to make our grip closer and it's going to improve our depth. And then we all realized, nope, it really doesn't, because of the perception of where your elbow is in relation to your shoulder. And so the reason elbow flare is so important, hopefully I'll describe this well. Again, Sean in the Powerlifting Now video really breaks this down, because this is where the perception comes in, is the further an object is away from another object, it distorts the perception and how it is. And so when our shoulder's here and our elbow is further away because we're tucking more, it makes the elbow look higher than it actually is in relation to the shoulder, versus the closer that elbow is to where the shoulder is, aka more flared, the more it looks like we're actually getting further range of motion with that elbow joint. So with elbow flare, I mean, it kind of goes hand in hand that we see that kind of go with more internal rotation and a wider grip. Now, that's dependent on the person. Maybe you're not meant to max grip and that's not where you need to go. But either way, biasing towards more elbow flare is going to give us the perception of more depth, and is pretty crucial if you're on that borderline spectrum to be able to give that perception of where that elbow is in relation to the shoulder. So those are the 3 low-hanging fruit, low interference options that I'd start with. There's obviously more that you can be able to do, but I think those are the ones that are the easiest to apply. They have the least changes needed likely to the lifter that are going to affect their technique and make them feel like they have to relearn everything. It likely is not going to make big programming changes. And if you're borderline, I think that's a really, really good place to start with your foot position, with wearing a belt, and then make sure in relation to however you bench, you're maximizing your elbow flare. So the one thing I'll say, and I'll put up a picture here of Abigail, is also make sure, this goes back to perception, that when you are judging depth, make sure to be wearing a shirt like you would in competition. Now, the picture I put up of Abigail, her shirt was a little bit baggy, but one of the perception things is where is that top of your front delt? And that's one of the reasons why we're seeing that lower weight class females are getting a bit disproportionately biased against with bench depth versus like larger men because of that, the front delt and the size of it. But the shirt, especially if it's tight and you get a little bit of a stretch here, kind of makes that shoulder look a little bit higher. And so you can see, this is the picture I put of Abigail, I'll put it up again. Literally was the same day. One was her warm-up and one was the actual working set. And you can tell on this, perception-wise, the shirt makes it look lower. So within all of this, make sure if you're applying these things, make sure to also judge depth while wearing a shirt, because that's what you're going to be doing in competition. So as always, if you have any questions, leave a comment below and I'd be happy to answer. Give the video a like, make sure to subscribe. And if you have any friends or maybe your athletes that you coach who you find that this video could be useful for, make sure to share it with them as well. So until next time, peace.